So stratification, we talked about tribalism briefly, and that's a way that's, people are moving geographically, and then they're kind of putting a virtual wall around their new space, and they're trying to lock in the condition. So what we find in the United States is fierce opposition to the goals of, say, de-escalating stratification. There are examples you can see in almost any condition. So for example, in California, which has a strong culture of individualism and single-family homes, there have been law after law or effort after effort to say around any kind of transit hub where you can have a higher level of transportation other than a car, and we should be building higher density. We should be putting apartments, right? We should be having multifamily buildings there. And local citizens have resisted that tooth and nail, right? Because they fear that a multifamily building next to their single family home is going to diminish their home's value, number one. And number two, it's going to bring other people other than themselves into
this is because, fortunately, especially in the US, has been developed this society of the suspect.
Yes.
I remember I was really shocked when I visited the first time South Bend, which was 2003, so 2 years after September 11. And in a district where one of our colleagues used to live, it was a sign that was saying, notice it is strictly forbidden to stop in group in the streets. We can call FBI. Because they were afraid about people together. This obsession for terrorism was forbidding to use the public space to talk. This is, I took a picture because I was not believing that is possible. But obviously in a society that is that wants to separate people more than integrate people, there is this idea that if I have someone near my apartment, he could be a criminal. I don't want to have anyone next to me. On one hand, people are complaining because of the environment. On the other hand, they don't want to do anything to change it because they are afraid. That's why it's necessary to bring examples, successful examples. Now, we were talking about Testaccio of 100 years ago, but since I mentioned it, I think we can take a look at a model like Plessis Robinson, which was a social housing. It was completely built for a working class. It was partially empty, partially abandoned. But now, this district, you have a fantastic mix of social classes. We have 43% of the houses that are social. And nobody's complaining. I remember I was there for the International Making Cities Livable Conference 2 years ago. And walking into the park, I met a lady with a baby. And she saw me taking pictures, and she was saying, "What are you doing? Do you like it?" She was very proud. I said, "Yes, I like very much. We're here for this conference." I said, "Yes, I moved here with my husband. We rented an apartment, but we fell in love. We believe that this is such a dreaming place that we decided to purchase our house and live here for the rest of our life." And this is a place where you have an incredible mix of social classes, but anthropologically speaking, because this is another great achievement of the earliest 20th century, and it is something that was well analyzed when Testaccio was built, it was anthropologically demonstrated that when you live in a group, and there is someone that is just a little bit more, let's say, wealthy than you, and then there is one that is richer and richer and richer, whoever is on one level tends spontaneously to emulate the behavior and the habit of the one that is just one step above, because that is something that could be the same masked if you want, but this is not to mask, it's simply to try to do anything possible to appear not different, because nobody wants to appear different in bad. Maybe you want to appear different in good. And this is the reason why they made this phrase, La Casa Sana Educatrice, because they understood how this kind of environment, this kind of building that was stimulating the sense of belonging and were making the social mix, was also changing the behavior. That's why it's the Committee for the Moral and Economic Improvement of Testaccio. because it was some kind of system of self-education that is happening in community when you have the mix of social classes. That's why it's completely wrong, and I'm going to repeat up to the end of my life that I was horribly disappointed in a conference I've been in Seattle a few years ago, where they were promoting as an excellent, good example of respect the idea of designing a district for the Latinos, district for the Black, different from whatever. Because the more we created this ghetto, the more we crystallize the problem, the more we make these people suspicious of the others, the more they refuse the other, the more we provoke a war among poors, instead of understanding that if I'm Black, I need to be together with the other. I don't need to have this bitterness against those that are obliging me to live in this condition, because we are all humans, independently from religion, independently from color, and we need to produce a society that is hosting everybody, because we are belonging to the same animal, the same spice, and the same planet. So we need to share the world, as John Lennon used to say.
As regards right, this is the wish, no? And this is the ideal to be achieved, no? On anthropological grounds, the other point is this group building, as you addressed it, we versus the others, no? And it's a realistic anthropological move and tendency, you know, that also for identity and community, you know, that I as an individual being must have the feeling, the sense, the impression that I belong to some people that are similar as I am. Huh? Not in material terms necessarily, but in terms of mindset, of understanding, of sensitivity, of interests, Huh? And the point of the dialogue, as what we addressed yesterday, with this ethos, so that the place can really make a certain way of a behavior and understanding. The point of the dialogue is, am I, as member of this community A, no, able and willing to enter into a dialogue with a member of community B? And then we keep open. And then we have, in a positive sense, a testatio. And the question is what has to be done in terms of frame conditions, also in architectural frame conditions of the built space, but also in architectural conditions of the social organization, of a social organizational framework. This is architecture too, despite invisible, in order to ensure this for dialogue between different groups. No?
So when we talk about the imperative of the environmental questions, and we talk about the stratification, like the polarization is what the word we're using in the United States right now as a constant phrase. We are polarized. We're on this side or we're on that side. And we're like magnets, you know, the poles are not aligned or are clashing. It's fascinating exactly what you say. We can understand that the social economic mix, the kind of the goal to not have any stratification in society is a noble goal. We can design spatially places where people can mix, and where, you know, literally the architecture, as you've said, is it's not the unification, it's the unity through variety, right? And that there's no distinguishing characteristics, as you said, Dennis, between, say, someone who's living in a subsidized condition and somebody who's not, a free market condition. So those principles, I think we can espouse, and I think there are probably many people in the built environment industry or in government or in social advocacy are looking for those, and we can call it social justice. But the trend I've seen over the course of my lifetime in terms of the free market allowing people to, developers to keep gobbling up, say, new, green territory that's farmland and other things, and convert that into community, often with a gate at the front, and maybe sometimes with a literal gate and a guard. They might be even a little bit diverse, say racially, but they're often not diverse economically. That's a trend that is so powerful, and there is such defensiveness around preserving that trend that in a way is an equally, kind of entrenched interest that is similar to the myths on sustainability, where all the money and resources and efforts towards sustainability are being steered in a direction that is inherently unsustainable. Similarly, we have this entrenched stratification of society. And so how do you get, community A, somebody from community A and community B to be willing? I mean, there's small examples that are really fascinating. So I was studying one particular public housing complex in Brooklyn, New York, near where I used to teach. And, we did terrible stratification with our public housing in the United States, which is similar to what Paris had on the outskirts. We have it in New York scattered throughout there's 400,000 public housing units or population, in New York City. So it's like a small city in its own right of people with very low income living in these groups of estates of housing, which are literally separated from the city around them. Different urban form. The streets don't go through. If you don't live in those estates, you never walk through them. You walk around them, right? And they're super blocks. So in Brooklyn, there's a housing estate there, and it turned out and there's a school right next to it. And the school was for kindergarten through 8th grade kids. So, 6-year-olds to like 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. And in New York, those kind of schools are zoned based on a geographic area. So that school was geographically zoned only for the public housing. So all the public housing kids, unless they went to, say, a Catholic school or some other type of school, they went to that school. But then all the other neighborhoods were sending all their kids to another school. And the city, the Department of Education said, you know what, this is not working. We have this overcrowded school over here, and we have this underpopulated school over here. We're going to take half of this zone, and we're going to send them to this school. So what happened?
Yeah, what happened?
Explosion of emotions on both sides. Nobody wanted to integrate. That the public housing residents didn't want these new families with much higher income, different color skin. They said, you're going to come to our school and you're going to try to change it so it's good for your kids and not for our kids. Our kids are now going to be losing attention and so forth.
That is always a question of creating a cluster, which is a cluster of different.
Yes.
Instead of having the mix, as the law said in Rome 100 years ago, if you facilitate the integration, the entire society will be in debt.
Yes.
Something that was also, since you were talking about the school, something that is completely unknown.
Yes.
Especially for you as American, because in your country this is very popular. When Pirani, when Talamo were building this district, because also the district San Lorenzo was one of these, together with this, among the many different thinkers of those days, it was a lady that was doing something very, very smart. Because Pirani used to say, our courtyard are not secondary spaces where just windows are facing, a secondary function are facing, but are extension of the public realm into the block. And these spaces are hosting other fundamental function, like, for instance, nursery, kindergarten.
Right.
So Maria Montessori was working hand in hand with the Pirani and Talamo building the kindergarten on those days called La Casa dei Bambini, the house of children, into the blocks, to make these blocks really like a piazza, like spaces, with the little building designed on purpose for kids, because they understood that the city to work needs to be provided with all the functions for all the ages. So it was the school for the children, the school for the elementary, et cetera, et cetera. So it was important. But this was working also because those people, those kids that were going to the school were belonging to, the working class family, but also the white collar family, the middle class. Yeah. Obviously, it was not the super rich that was living there, but this was facilitating the integration, was zeroing the cost of construction, as I mentioned. It was a perfect system that was perfectly performing to create the real sense of community.
Well, in this case in Brooklyn, after all the up in arms, newspaper articles are being written, people are protesting and having public meetings with a lot of shouting, then the integration starts. The Department of Education was not deterred. They said, we're going through with this no matter what. And then it went silent. So in essence, the emotion was the fear, but after the change occurred, then the emotions subside, and I think then the community starts to get together and make it work.
That might be an issue of the size of the city at all.
Yeah, right.
Because if that struggle for perceived own rights does affect too much of the population,
yes,
then even a willing city administration gets into severe trouble.
Right. Yes.
And could tell some stories about that.
Sure.
Which surely happened because the city was too small, and the separation of interests raised into too much conflict, and so there was no settlement at all, and the projects all were kept in the end.
Right.
So very interesting. I'll write a book on this, and yes, you do the forward.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think it's the scale of these questions of how society can, the scale of what we call community, the scale at which we're trying to create integration, I think is a key factor. And there may have been cultural contexts that might be more facilitating of it, other cultural contexts that make it much more difficult. But our discussion today is in a way, is the city, paramount to the future of a democratic society? And therefore, we need to talk about scale, and we need to say, if the pattern of stratification is an anti-urban one relative to, the mixture of people and diversity, then we have to really, that's what I think we're trying to really dig into today, is these kind of questions and the paramount nature of scale, of urban form, to these questions of, can we forge communities in places that they don't currently exist? Can we said yesterday, can we recognize that diversity is actually one of the great energizers in urban places? And so today, diversity, especially immigrants, of course, are being seen as the other, and that's an anti-immigration or anti-diversity kind of movement. So these are the questions we have, and I would contend that the urban form and the city and density, population density, where say you even in the kilometer-long project, you were increasing the population density. Like you were saying, maybe more people are going to make this even a more viable place, right?
The historical center of Rome is hyper-dense.
Yes.
But is accompanied with a lot of spaces for gathering people, with a lot of piazze, piazzette, strofo. So it's not the density that is bad.
Yeah.
Because in the 60s, it was also made intentionally, this misunderstanding, confusing the overcrowded condition of the apartment. That is a problem, because having some density within the same space is something. Is the density of an urban settlement, which is something that has nothing to do with the healthy problem of the density. But practically speaking, to understand how to make the social mix is very easy if instead of thinking as a designer, because this is another thing I always debate with my students, because many times those that are in love with the classicism believe that a kind of facade, a kind of detail in a facade, a bilateral symmetry is the solution, while Vitruve is never talking about the bilateral symmetry, he's talking about the symmetry. Bilateral is one option.
Yes.
But if we analyze the dynamics of real estate, we understand that within the same block, the apartments have different values, which is the way that also in the way of managing a condo building, the percentage of properties, it is evaluated in order to understand how to share the cost of maintenance. Because I can have an apartment that is a super luxury apartment on the terrace that has a terrace. I need to take in consideration the insulation. I have to take in consideration the views. I need to take in consideration the presence of the elevator. I have to take in consideration many different things. So within the same building, within the same facade, I have apartments that are much more valuable than others. So instead of being slave of bilateral symmetry, we need to watch at what is surrounding the place, what are the conditions of the place, and we need to think always at the 3-4 dimensional design that is taking in consideration all the possible effects, all the possible return, and decide what are the more fortunate apartments that are those to be put on the real estate market for sale, and what are those apartments that are less fortunate that I can use as a social housing, which doesn't mean that I want to put in the worst apartment those people, but it's clearly that whatever kind of apartment I produce for these people with the right healthy condition would be better than any kind of building. And at the end, they are going to share the same space and they're going to have a completely different behavior because they are sharing the same spaces. If I build in the same urban intervention, building for wealthy people and one building only for the poor, I maintain at a smaller scale the same problem of the ghettization. I need to share. And because of the completely different condition within the same block, it is much more profitable to share spaces and put the different families in many different buildings rather than put all together within the same block. And maybe in that case, create a disparity because then someone can be envious because one family has that. Why not me? While they need to understand that the apartment for rent is something, the apartment for sale is something else. And at the end, we share the same community.
Okay. I can go back just a couple of moments. You're talking about the integration in community, like school situation.
Right.
I think, let's say in most countries in the world right now, we're going through a transitional society, right? So therefore, in the whole structure that you're discussing, that you're integrating, when you have a wave of immigration, like we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, where it's a specific wave, let's say Middle Eastern people or Russians or whatever, right?
Right.
So you've got the structure all set, you've got the community all set, and everybody calms down into the system that exists. And then you have a new wave come in a year later, and they move into the community.
Right.
And they're not accepted by maybe most people because they're a separate community again, maybe with their own language mainly, their own community, everything.
Right.
Then how do you vary the established plan or the educational plan, let's say that the education department, to integrate these people better and make them more part of an overall community?
Well, the answer is again Testaccio, because Testaccio is a district that is built for the immigrants. They were coming to Rome from Calabria, from Puglia, from Basilicata, from Emilia-Romagna, from Veneto, because even the part of the north of Italy was poor. And they were hating each other at the end. That's why it were all these conflicts. But at the end, thanks to the role of the committee and thanks to the way the city, the blocks, the buildings were built, they changed completely the way of behaving. They were mixed together with the middle class. They were not separated. If you want to solve the problem of language, instead of making the Chinatown, you have to have all these Chinese all around, because this is a way to develop more the language. This doesn't mean that they have to forget their language. I'm from Puglia, I'm living in Barletta, but at some time, especially for the jokes, I like to use the dialect of my hometown. It will be a crime to cut the rules. This is part of the tradition. But if I park these people away from me, they will be never part of the community. They will never part of the city. And they will always believe that the community doesn't want to have them as a part of the city, because they are forgotten in a separate district, far from the eyes, far from the heart. If we simply think of the importance of making the integration, we can have a more justice society, because at the end, obviously, even for defending themselves, they can develop behaviors that are aggressive simply because they feel ignored, they feel invisible.
I mean, I think if and I agree with you totally. I think you're totally right. But I mean, in Germany here, for instance, in specific areas, we know that there's a Ukraine-Russian war going on. There's an infiltration of, let's say, maybe up to 2 million Ukrainians that have come into Germany, which is not a problem. But in certain cities, they've organized themselves so that they have people finding apartments for them, finding everything, and they are basically pushing out in the view of the local resident, like the local German, let's say, if I can use that, and you hear conversations, they're taking away our city, they're taking away our culture. I understand integration, and I totally agree on integration, but how do you overcome this? And the other problem is, if the war finishes, and after this integration, all these people leave, and you have all this empty space again, how do you reincorporate all that so that there's no change in the societal structure of the town that has been changed? You understand what I'm saying?
No, I understand perfectly. In Italy, we're experiencing the same. The problem is not that much the one of the immigrants, but is the one of locals, especially the politicians that are provoking racism. Because in Italy, unfortunately, we have also members of the government, which are horribly racist. The Lega Lombarda is a serious problem, and we have the minister Salvini, which is a person that is not racist only against the foreigners, but is also racist against the Southern. Because I remember a few years ago when he was hoping that the Etna was going to destroy Sicilians, or Vesuvio was going to explode and destroy Naples. Unfortunately, we have these people which are the real problems, much, much more than the immigrants. There are people that are saying that they are going to steal our job, while we have locals that don't want to make the job. Because as we said yesterday, the maximum ambition of human being today is to become a parasite. And this is the maximum ambition of the wealthy people. Because the young people that are addicted on internet, on TikTok and on Instagram understood, and as we said yesterday, it has been created a university to have to become an influencer, which is insane. These are the real problems that are causing the other problems. We are always blaming the poor because those people like Salvini in Italy are provoking the war among poor to maintain their privileges. But at a certain point, those people are going to realize that the problem is not the different, but is the wealthy guy that is pushing them to attack and criticize these people. Without those people that are doing the work we are no longer doing, we will have no more people into construction. We will have no more people into in agriculture, because these now are considered horrible jobs for poor. And I want to appear richer and wealthy because I know that there is a way to become rich without doing anything. So it's a serious sociological problem that is
and political. So there's political work to be done. Like we need leaders. Like the leadership definitely has to be on board if we're going to have integration, because we have leadership that wants to stoke rivalry, right, or tribalism, or scapegoat, then we know that doesn't work. And definitely, it's super fascinating to know how will society recognize that this anti-immigration movement is leading to, the construction costs are going to go sky high when we don't have a labor force doing construction. Food prices are going to go up, and food shortages will happen when we don't have people, doing the backbreaking labor in the fields of our agriculture. And, if you go to any kind of hospital assisted living, things like that, the people that are taking care of, doing the very tough jobs to take care of people in a nursing home or something like that, they're also losing they're also being pushed out.
There are other problems that are completely, partially, more than completely unknown, because it has been officially declared in Italy by many politicians.
Yes.
That due to the fact that the population is getting elder.
Yes.
There are a lot of people that needs to be paid as a retired people.
Yes.
But there are no income to pay.
Yes.
So we need to have new Italians, new workers that are working to produce the money to pay the retirement to others.
Yes.
Germany also.
So in some way, it is clear, and this is really sad, because unfortunately this is true. There is an intention of Europe to have the immigration from the north of Africa,
right?
Because we need to have this labor.
Right.
The problem is that something is to do it properly in a human way,
right?
And something is to allow criminals in Libya, for instance, that are abusing of these people and are taking a lot of money to these people to allow them to arrive, because there is a real traffic.
Yes.
Because at the end, it is undeniable that unfortunately there is the need for this specific reason of getting elder and not having enough income to pay the retirement for people. So instead of provoking wars and battles among a cluster of the poor people, it's necessary to be honest enough and say, okay, the situation is this. If we want to go forward in the respect of everybody, we can go forward. Then obviously, I would prefer, not because of racist reasons, but simply because I think cutting the roots of a person is a crime. I would prefer that these people will be not forced to leave their own countries, and they can stay where they were born until they don't decide on their own to move. Because something migrates for needs, and something is to migrate because you want to do it.
That is a difference. That's a bit different. Independence, it's an important point, immigration, and the demographic development in Western European countries is also an important point, also in regards to a community. A community presupposes some people alive to live in this community, and of mixed age. Now, this would be feasible.
Yes.
And this can be a problem. Another problem is what you addressed as a society of parasites, and the new or the ideal to live like a parasite, fostered by the social media. And when I want to live as a parasite, I do not need community. That's it. No? There is no common good, because for a parasite, the very idea of a common good is not relevant. What we do with these people.
Yeah, so our major discussion before our break at 2:30 in just a little bit is community but also spatial representation of community, urban forms supporting the concept of community, the idea of, say, a public realm, whether it's the piazze of a network or it's the block structure that allows for this public intertwining within the block or semi-public space within the block. The questions of density and configuration, like the example of the kilometer-long housing, is like the line that's currently being built in Saudi Arabia, which we can only imagine is going to be a sociological.
Stop that. Thank goodness they stopped.
They did stop it.
Yeah, but in any case, they did too much already.
Yes. So the these are conceptual ideas that have no reflection of the spatial. There's a necessity of spatial form, urban form, that situates people in ways that they can interact in a way that we call community. Would you agree with that? And how do we describe that?
Yeah, go. Please.
Well, a very short side note is this urban form relates to the idea of Gestalt.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Well, the shape or the form of urban settlement, it is changing country by country.
Right.
In my opinion, it has been a mistake made also by some of our colleagues that are working in classical traditional urbanism and architecture to decide that a model, which is the model of the Italian medieval Renaissance city, it is valid for all around the world. Because if I analyze an English traditional city, there is not a network of piazze and piazzette, but there is the main street and the market piazza.
Right.
So this kind of cultural colonization made because of ideology is wrong. As I said yesterday, I'm involved in this project in Qatar, where the kind of urbanism, the kind of building is kilometers far from the one we have in the Western world, because it's based on the model of the souk, is based on the needs of shading the spaces.
Right.
And I've seen some project with the piazze where you can roast the eggs. I was 1 year ago, was the end of October, and it was 48 Celsius degree. So we need to understand that places are different, and that urban settlement have been realized by the wise people to resist, to survive in this specific condition. For instance, I visited a city in Libya, Gadam, which I hope is still existing, because unfortunately with the war of 2010, I don't know what happened in this place that was also UNESCO protected. It was built in the dune of the desert. And I found a fantastic place with a good thermal condition, because the city was partially sunken. And this outstanding idea developed in the Arab world of the Badgir, which are the wind tower that are creating natural ventilation. Instead of making the ventilation of the building, was making the ventilation of the streets that were shaded and ventilated, humidified. So outside of the city were 50 degrees, probably into the city were not more than 28, 30 degrees, without using any kind of
energy.
Yeah. So every place has developed the specific conditions that could be urban condition, but also architectural condition. For instance, these I mentioned, but if I simply compare the neoclassicism I can have, Baroque and neoclassicism we can have in the southern part of Europe, and the one I can have in Russia or in Sweden, there is a big difference. In these places where you have so much darkness and so much livid condition because of ice, because of snow, they have psychedelic colors on the building, which is something that is defending our eyes to contrast the bluish gamma of light.
Mhm.
If we don't understand that there is no possibility to have one language that is valid for all over the world, we don't go anywhere. So we can be classicists, but we can be wrong classicists, like neoclassicists. Many Beaux-Arts, not the neoclassicists, did.
Yes.
Saying that, when we design, we need to always to understand that spaces have been designed according to these needs, but also according to the needs of respecting the countryside.
Yeah.
Because the countryside used to give the possibility to survive first.
Yes.
And the human scale was the center of gravity. So human scale means that we need to design, we need to shape the voids according to our needs. We need to understand what is the right ratio according to the climate condition. What is the right ratio between the width and the height of a space? What is the right distance between one space and the other? And this could be something that is influenced by the needs of having the proper way of gathering people simply to spend time, or as the outstanding design made after the eruption of 1669 and the earthquake of 1693 have been developed in the south of Sicily, where for seismic reason it was made some master plan, or made a series of master plan that is urbanism for seismic region, creating a rhythm of spaces that are dimensioned on purpose to gather people and save lives in case of collapses of buildings. So there are many things that needs to be taken in consideration instead of thinking that I have a solution, universal solution that is valid for everybody. So we need to make case-by-case studies, whatever we do. And as I always say to my students, the first thing to be done is to design the edges. Because in the ancient city, you have the city walls that used to be to protect from possible enemies to come. Probably now we need to have a kind of idea of the city walls to protect the countryside from the expansion of the city. Because if we understand that the right dimension, as Gustavo Giovannoni demonstrated 100 years ago, and more recently, Leon Krier was defining the city of the 10 minutes walk, which recently has been extended to 15. We don't know for what kind of reason. But, maybe to write a new book, you can make,
I'm going to do the 12 minutes.
Okay, good. 12 and a half, be in between.
Yes.
So, if we know these things, not because of ideology or theory, but because these have been well tested, and this is not something that is referring also only to the ideal way of living, but is also referring to the cost of maintenance and managing places. We can understand that instead of having, like in Rome, as I said yesterday, a crazy place with no respect of the public road, and even the more recent piazza are ridiculous, ugly spaces. The piazza that has been built in front of San John at the Lateran, emulating these stupid places typical of France, with the fountains, holes in the floor with the jets of water that I nickname the surprise bidet. So, which is horrible.
Very appropriate, yeah.
It's we need to understand that the construction and the maintenance of paving pattern is fundamentally important. A paving pattern that is the carpet where you are invited to walk. It's something that is respected. It's something where no one is going to trash anything on the floor, because really it is in some way intimidating or educating you. In Italy, we have this attitude of leaving the gifts of dogs on the floor, which is something that is really terrible. But I'm sure that with a more elegant pavement, even the very ignorant person that is leaving this gift on the floor is going to...
Does not do it.
Yeah. This is really something, the kind of urban space we design has an influence on our behavior, as the Staccio model said, because the casa sana ed educatrice is also the città sana ed educatrice. So we can educate people using the proper way. But obviously, if I have a city that is 1,384 square kilometers, like in Rome, I don't have any money to manage that.
Yeah.
I need to create a fragmentation. I need to have a series of autonomous small cities. Maybe
It's our decentralization point.
exactly.
Inside,
Exactly. Because historical cities were multicentral. The modern city is a monocentric. It's like the spot of oil into the water that is expanding and loses the control. So the design of the edges is fundamentally important. The design of the stroll is fundamentally important. Now, if you are thinking about something to be scratched from zero, the views to be frames is the one that can influence the way I'm designing the city. If I have some space, if I have some specific building that can work as a landmark to attract and redirect, is something I have to take in consideration. This means that designing, as unfortunately is happening, is no longer happening in that manner, because a lot of mistakes in the 20th centuries are made by people that were working on their desk without knowing what they were designing. Now it's even worse, because architects are believing in the screen of the computer. And if on the computer with the rendering, they can have vegetation that is growing vertically on the walls, they believe that that is doable. And then they are promoting this ridiculous bosco verticale. And then the cost of maintenance and pollution made with the fertilizer, that's another story. So this is the way we can consider the way of designing. So not a universal law, but local manners according to the long-term tradition, which is fundamentally important to reinforce and develop the sense of belonging, the identity of places, and something that is related obviously with the local conditions that are completely different. There are places where you need to have a steep roof, places where you can have a shallow roof, spaces where you don't need a roof at all. And probably, and as in the Arab world, for instance, places where you need vaulted spaces, because the curvature of the vault is something that is increasing the speed of the air. And because of the acceleration of the speed of the air, you can cooling the space and you can invite the hot air to get out, simply because of the acceleration you can create with the extradux of vaults and domes. So it's impossible to have one language that is valid for all around the world, but it's always necessary to have the same methodology to understand the places and work in continuity with the places, instead of negating the identity of places.
And together, that's like as a bit of a genius loci of a place, right? It's there's a human response to the environment. There's a human response to the notion of community, right? Of building the defensive wall to keep out the enemies, or tearing down the walls to create the relationship to the nature. And now the need to make edges that keep sprawl from happening. So there's like the levels. Your methodology then is like understanding environmental response, understanding, materiality due to local available materials, understanding culture that's responded to this condition over long periods of time, understanding, social practices that, for example, in the Islamic city, in Marrakesh, you don't really find, you find a market square and you find the souk, but you don't find piazze like you do in a medieval Italian town, right? The courtyard inside of the palace is hidden away, and it's where you invite people in, and that's where there's a social life happening at a different scale, in a different way than it does, say, in a culture where everyone meets out in the public realm more directly. But nonetheless, it's reflecting a sense of community, right? In all those cases, it's like looking at the way communities defined through cultural practices, through urban form, through environmental response, through the relationship to the countryside or the open space around, and through the materiality and even the tectonic expression that's responding to how I can cool down, create passive cooling inside a building or on a city street. So I think that's, so the key is from the technological point of view, if we talk about social media and we talk about technology, the view that we could build a kilometer-long structure because the technology will allow us to negate all that intelligence of history of place and response to all these conditions, and now the technology is going to allow us to, and the line, of course, was predicated on that, right? Like within this, we're going to use technology to cool, reflect the sun or have solar paneling to generate electricity. We're going to use technology to link people along this incredible length with public transportation. But it's clearly just ignorant of settlement pattern around, so many of these nuances that are the things that actually have the chance to set up community. They don't ensure community, but they can set up community.
Mm-hmm. The question is, when architecture in a positive sense does influence the behavior of people, no? What happens if people responsible for commanding that architecture, for paying it, for making it possible, have no interest in community? Just simply no interest. For instance, at the line in Saudi Arabia, no?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a monument.
In a sense,
No?
this is the arrogance of those that believe to be God alive, and they can manipulate nature without thinking that would be a barrier to the wind that is going to change the climate of the rest of the planet. This is really these people that really believe to be God.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not only the prince, the Arab prince that can promote this, but there are people, architects that are imposing this. A few years ago, I remember when it was started the project of Mazzola, which was another crazy idea to create a place into the middle of the desert, desalinizing the water of the Gulf to bring the water there, and the salt that they were producing killed completely the life of vegetation and animals nearby the place where they were trashing, and then even that project was abandoned. Norman Foster was the designer, was not the last person, but at a certain point these star architects are believing to be really God.
Mm-hmm.
They can manipulate. The guy in Italy that is making the vertical forest is another one.
Yeah.
And then there is the problem of the city built in China by the same person that now is abandoned place because this kind of vegetation brought in a climate where this is wrong. It is the place where the worst kind of insects are attacking people. So there is the belief in the screen of the computer. We know that on the computer, the rendering shows that it's doable and I'll do it. Without thinking at what are the side effects, we always need to have a vision beyond to understand what is going to be the gesture I'm doing, what is going to be the consequence of that.
What we do with these people, it's part of the human condition that these people always exist, who believe they are God, who believe in screens, who are short-sighted, also who have very, very particular interests, to say it in a diplomatic manner. What we do with these people, with this kind of people, when we want to make architectures for communities.
So we start by hoping that a democratic system can contend, right? Like a democratic culture should be able to, take the rough edges of extremism and bring it back to something where there's consensus building, where there's, that you don't, your path to leadership is through bringing people together, not dividing people.
Like good leadership.
But okay. If we want to be honest, we need to be honest, we have to identify where the problem starts.
Well,
The university that is teaching wrongly the way of making architecture. Because if we make a brainwash on our students and we convince them about something, about some ideology, what we have is that we produce monsters that are worse than ours, because there is always this tendency in going forward. And this is what happened after Second World War with a dogmatic teaching that was forbidden to do something that was acceptable, and it was imposing the needs of being weird. In Italy, we have the word famolo strano, let's do it weird, which looks like the slogan of any modern architects, that in order to appear, in order to show that she has his own manner, does weird things like Frank Gehry, like Zaha Hadid, like Rem Koolhaas. And this theory brought people like Rem Koolhaas in the 80s. He's so popular architect, but he became popular because his slogan in the 80s was "fuck the context." This is crazy, you know. We are considering as divinities these people that did probably some special treatment by psychologists. And these theories are those that the School of Architecture are imposing to the students. I remember when I was a student, when it was not possible to pass the exam of design until you were not doing exactly what your professor were asking about, which was not based on logic, but it was based only on ideology. It was made the theory of falsification of history much earlier. And step by step, it was developed this idea. Yesterday, we were talking about this crazy theory of the New Jerusalem classless society, which was exactly the opposite of what really was to be done, was going to be done. So if the schools are brainwashing students, there is no future, because we are never going to have the right people that are working as the right advisors, because we can blame politicians up to a certain point, because a politician needs the advisor that is the expert of the matter. And if the expert of the matter is a crazy person that presents the problem in some way, the politician is going to make a mistake because he believes in the person that he trusted. I would like to remember that in the end of his life, Le Corbusier wrote something that is really funny, because he said that he spent 42 years of his life on the problem of Paris, which, has a problem, Paris. Right. And the problem of Paris for him was the creation of la Cité for 3 millions des inhabitants. So it is a city for 3 million of inhabitants. That was the Plan Voisin. Voisin was the car producer that sponsored that project. And he tried all his life to do that. And he said at the end of his life, politicians in this country, in these cities, were very ungrateful, because I spent all these years, they never allowed me to do it, and they also called me barbarian. Come on, it's like the guy that is driving on the right side of the highway and is listening. There is a crazy guy that is driving on the highway in the opposite direction, say, it's not only one, I'm surrounded by. Because he refused that he was wrong. All the rest of the world was wrong. And this is unfortunately the way many architects are doing. And if we are in this condition, it's because of 80 years of wrong teaching that created some immense mass of archi-criminals. So it's necessary to change completely the system of teaching, not because of ideology, because of real needs, because we care about the planets, we care about human beings, we care about the real needs, and it's the time for crazy ideology is over.
Right. So the care of the built environment is we're gonna take that snippet alone and publish it. The care of the built environment that Ettore is showing great passion for, has been, turned upside down. And Le Corbusier was drawing it for Paris. in New York, we'd always use the World's Fair with the Futurama. The Futurama was GM,
1939.
General Motors, built this pavilion in Queens, and it had people would sit down in these chairs, and then they would be moving along a very slow track, and they'd have this glass in front of them, and they'd be looking down to this model of the future city. And in the future city, which was all Dubai, it looked like Dubai long before Dubai existed, but it was Le Corbusier's vision as well. It was highways everywhere, and they had little moving vehicles down in the model. The model was animated, and it was it was the vision that generated a disastrous infrastructure, the sprawl of cities, the reliance, the kind of passion for the high rise is like some sort of ultimate solution. But most importantly, the dedication to the motor vehicle, because a corporation had great financial stakes and profit motive in that, which is why, in a country that, like if you take Detroit as a city, they suffer immensely because they literally abandoned rich streetcar system. They abandoned a method of the city growing to a single family home, everyone with a garage in the city, not like outside the city. In the city limits, they developed, they switched to a single family home approach because you had Ford and GM saying every person in Detroit should have their own parking place.
It's also broadacre city of Frank Lloyd Wright.
Right.
Yeah.
So what happened to Detroit is after industrial collapse in the city, the great reduction of car production, white flight leaving the city because the city was falling apart. Today, Detroit lost, I can't remember the right numbers, but I think it's somewhere in the range of 50% of the population of the city, or even more.
From almost 3 million to 700,000.
Yes. And physically, that meant that they had all this abandoned housing, like houses that were just literally abandoned and falling apart. So the city then had to go out to all these places and take possession of the property, demolish these houses, and plant grass.
Yeah.
And that's the condition you find Detroit right now.
Oh.
And it's immense.
There is an immense square hole in the center.
Yes. And you have roads that they can never plow, and there might be one or two houses still with somebody still living in it. There's no way they can afford to plow that street. There's no way they can afford to send the firefighters out there. There's no way they can repair that street and repave it. It's infrastructure in total decay. And until they get a handle on that, you have this, bizarre post-urban condition in the city of Detroit.
Which could be an interesting aspect.
Yeah, no, it makes
you addressed it.
And I was talking about it in Barcelona.
The community as without a city.
Yes.
In post-urban conditions, this Mad Max scenarios, Mad Max 1, a civilization has been fallen down.
Right.
We have remnants of a centralized order, but only remnants. Many areas are off limits, as this is at the age after the fall of the Roman Empire.
It feels like it. But it's not realistic.
Yeah, we are at the end of another empire.
Yeah.
Well, the empire of consumerism, how to say? Yeah, empire of consumerism.
But the scale doesn't feel the same to all of us. I mean, when I fly or I look on the map of Germany and I'm looking at satellite view, I see a beautiful preservation of a lot of farmland. I see cities that seem to have a limit. I see little pockets of density, but huge amounts of zone of productive land. And it's not it's not white clay. If you fly from Miami to Boston, you're not going to see many places that look like that.
Yeah, but that is, yes, as I said, the USA is the place that suffered more than all the others because of Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd, right? The theories of using the entire land because you had a lot of land.
Yes.
Which was belonging to the local indigenous, but that's another story.
Yes.
And so it was no idea, no reason to work with something that was compact, because that was the theory made for car producer.
Yes.
And the car producer purchased all the public transportation to dismantle and make the American addicted on cars. So
and reliant on it.
USA, and that was also possible because of this idea of properties that in the US is different from the Europe. And that's why Europe probably resisted a little bit more than the drama of the USA. But since we were talking about these things and we were talking about the future, you were mentioning Futurama, which is a fantastic things to be known. I think there is something recent that was one of the most incredible message delivered by the Disney. It was the end of the 90s. It was a cartoon, which is, I think, the most important lesson delivered to our society, obviously to children, because that cartoon is for children to think about the meaning of life in some way, and to give a warning message. Because I don't know if you are familiar with this movie that is called WALL-E.
Yes.
It's one of the greatest lessons because it talks about the world, the planet Earth, that has been polluted at such an incredible level that the entire population has been forced to take some spaceship and spend time into the space, leaving some little robot that is a mechanical garbage box that is left on the planet Earth to check if life is back. When he finds some plant that is boarding, he sent a message to the spaceship to say, hey, you can come back. But the computer, the system, is trying to plot the message, to block the message. But what is the great message, which is a specific message to the American society, that because of this addiction on car transportation and the sedentary life, it has some level of obesity that is extremely high. So those people that are living on the spaceship are all horribly obese. They are living on these kind of floating chairs, and they are not doing anything but that. And when the message arrives, what is interesting is that before coming back to the planet Earth, first of all, they have to read a book because they are no longer reading. And the book is a book that is giving them the know-how, how to live as humans. And the first thing they have to learn is that they have legs. They didn't know that they had the legs. And they need to understand how they can walk. I think this is an incredible message that is has been completely taken, forgotten, not taken in consideration.
Not as powerful.
But that is really the message that shows where we are going to arrive if we don't stop and we don't understand that the American lifestyle of the last century has been completely wrong.
Which is a perfect place to leave us, because I think when we pick up after lunch, we switch to, talking about the city in this more profound way. And I think the impact of the city on lifestyle, right? And the consolidation of all these different things that we've been talking about today, diversity, individuality, communal, and so forth. So I think that's a great spot. And I agree, WALL-E is among the really most amazing allegorical films of the 21st century. All right, excellent. Thank you. Let's have some food.